This between us. When I was young, Dad used to wake me before dawn on Saturdays, murmuring, "Grab your boots, kiddo." We'd drive toward the shoreline with the windows cracked just enough to let the salt air drift in. He showed me how to tie a line, how to wait without fidgeting, how to hear the quiet. Those mornings felt like the safest corner of the earth. Sometimes he'd lift me onto the dock and say, "Look at the horizon. That's how far you're allowed to dream." I believed every word. But everything shifted when I chose art instead of the business track he mapped out. I still remember the way his shoulders stiffened when I told him I'd accepted a place at an art school instead of studying finance. He didn't raise his voice. Dad almost never did. He just withdrew in that way that made the whole house feel colder. Brandon filled the silence for him. "She'll grow out of it," he'd tell relatives, smiling like he was doing me some kindness. Just a phase. Except it wasn't. As I grew older, the gap between Dad and me didn't feel accidental anymore. Calls weren't returned. Messages vanished into nothing. I'd send him photos of my pieces, paintings inspired by the skyline he'd helped shape in Boston. And sometimes weeks went by without a single reply. I told myself he was busy, that he didn't mean it, that we'd patch things up later. But later kept slipping further away. Moving to New York only made everything foggier. I tried to visit when I could, but the rare times I arrived, Brandon always seemed to be mid-conversation with Dad about some deal or expansion. They'd stop when I walked in, their energy shifting. Brandon would slap my shoulder just a bit too hard. "Still messing with paint," he'd joke. Everyone laughed except Dad, who only gave me the polite smile strangers share in elevators. By the time Dad's health began to decline, I didn't even know. No one told me. I heard from a distant cousin who assumed I was already aware. When I called home, Brandon answered for Dad and said he was resting, that stress wasn't good for him, and maybe I should give him space. I tried to believe that too. But sitting in that church, listening to my brother hurl accusations loud enough to bounce off stone, something inside me shifted. For the first time, I wondered if the distance I'd been trying to bridge wasn't between me and Dad at all, but between me and the truth. I stayed in my seat after the service, letting the crowd drift past in waves of whispered judgment. People I hadn't seen since childhood dodged my eyes, pretending to fix jackets or adjust scarves. Brandon didn't bother pretending. He stood at the front with Uncle Leonard and Aunt Marissa, speaking just loud enough for his words to carry through the hall. "She didn't visit. She didn't call. She only shows up now because there's money involved." Each word landed with the precision of someone who'd practiced the script for years. Maya squeezed my hand. "You don't have to stay here," she whispered. But I did. Walking out would only prove Brandon right. As I watched him soak in the attention, pieces of the past I tried to ignore started snapping into alignment. The ignored calls, the missing invitations, the time I flew home for Dad's birthday only to discover the dinner had been moved without anyone telling me. I cried in a rental car that night, convincing myself Dad was upset with me, that maybe I'd pushed too hard chasing a dream he didn't understand. Now watching Brandon smirk beneath the soft sanctuary lights, I felt the truth pull sharply. Someone had been feeding Dad a version of me that wasn't real, and that someone stood 10 feet away, adjusting his tie like he owned the room. When the reception began, I forced myself to walk through it. People shifted around me the way water flows around a stone. A board member from the family company gave me a tight smile. "Your brother carried so much these last few months," he said. He stepped up. Stepped on was closer to the truth. I kept moving. At the refreshment table, Aunt Marissa approached. "It must be hard," she said, voice dripping with glossy sympathy coming back after being away so long. "I wasn't gone," I said softly. She blinked, puzzled, as though the version of me she'd been handed left no room for pushback. But the worst moment was hearing Brandon tell someone near the doorway, "Dad wanted space." She made her choices. My breath stalled. That wasn't Dad's voice. That was Brandon's. Something inside me bent. Not like glass shattering but like steel warping, slow, hot, permanent. The turning point came when the family lawyer walked toward me. His expression carried something I hadn't seen all day. "Sincerity. Lily," he said quietly, "there's something you should know before tomorrow." Tomorrow? The will reading. For the first time since I walked into the church, I felt a flicker of something that didn't sting. Not hope exactly. More like the sense that the story Brandon had been shaping all these years was finally about to meet someone who could unravel it. I barely slept that night. The hotel room felt too still, too spotless, like a place meant for someone whose life wasn't slowly coming apart at the seams. I lay awake replaying every second of the funeral. Brandon's voice slicing through the air, the sidelong looks, the lawyer's unreadable expression. By dawn, fatigue pulsed behind my eyes, but my thoughts refused to settle. Maya knocked just after sunrise, holding 2 coffees and wearing the sweatshirt she always traveled in. "You look like you stared at the ceiling for 8 straight hours," she said. "I did," I confessed. She sat beside me. "What did the lawyer say yesterday?" "He didn't tell me anything concrete, only that I should brace myself." I pressed my fingers to my temples. "I don't know what that even implies." "It means something's coming," she said. "And not from Brandon." Her conviction steadied me more than the caffeine did. By mid-morning, I forced myself to walk through the city toward my father's house, the house I hadn't stepped into in years. The sharp Boston air stung my skin, carrying that familiar blend of winter and diesel memories stacked on top of one another like layers of paint. When I reached the steps, I paused. The housekeeper let me in with a gentle smile. "Your father mentioned you," she whispered. Startled me. "He did?" She nodded but offered nothing more. As she stepped away, guilt and longing knotted together inside me. Dad's study looked almost frozen in time. Papers neatly arranged. The same solid wooden chair. A photo of Brandon and me as kids sat on his desk, sunburned from a beach trip, grinning with ice cream dripping down our arms. Beside it, a single empty space where another frame should have been. I stared at that bare spot for a long moment. What had belonged there? Why was it missing? The house felt so quiet it was like a secret humming inside the walls. Back at the hotel, Maya sprawled across the bed, scrolling on her phone. She sat up when I walked in. "You okay?" "I'm not sure." I kicked off my boots. "The lawyer said he needed to talk before the meeting." "Talk privately?" I nodded. We met that afternoon in a small office on the top floor of a downtown building. Harold Jensen looked worn, as if the last few months had carved new lines he hadn't earned. "Lily," he said gently, "tomorrow will be hard for many people in that room. But not for you." "I don't understand." He folded his hands. "Your father made changes, significant ones, and he left." Explanation. Explanation. "You'll know tomorrow." Every answer he offered felt like a locked door. "Harold, did my dad want distance from me?" My voice cracked despite everything. Did he stop caring? He shook his head instantly. "No. Whatever you've been told about your father's feelings didn't come from him." My breath trembled. Then why didn't he lifted a hand. "Tomorrow." It was the only promise he would make. That night, something inside me shifted. Not hope, not yet, but the start of a boundary forming thin as a pencil line but solid. And when I finally lay back, staring at the ceiling of that too-tidy hotel room, one thought repeated until sleep finally dragged me under. Whatever tomorrow brings, I won't let Brandon speak for me ever again. I arrived early the next morning, hoping the quiet hallways would settle me. They didn't. My heart hammered with every echoing step toward the conference room at the end of the long corridor. Brandon's voice floated through the slightly open door. Confident, loud, dripping entitlement. "Dad knew who was loyal. Today we'll just make it official." My stomach twisted, but I pushed myself inside. The room went silent. Every chair at the long table was taken. Board members on one side, relatives on the other. Brandon planted at the head like he'd already claimed the throne. Uncle Leonard gave me a stiff nod. Aunt Marissa didn't bother hiding her disdain. I walked to the seat farthest from Brandon, the one clearly chosen for me, and sat. Brandon smirked. "You actually came." Bold. I didn't respond. At exactly 10 o'clock, Harold Jensen walked in with a folder tucked under his arm. But it wasn't the folder that shifted the atmosphere. It was the small USB in his hand, the same kind he'd brought to the church yesterday. Conversation stopped instantly. Everyone watched him set it on the table. "What's that?" Brandon asked, his voice tightening. "Your father insisted," Harold replied evenly. "We'll begin shortly." Brandon leaned back, trying to recover control. "Look, Harold, I know Dad wanted me to oversee everything. So if this is some sentimental..." "It isn't," Harold cut in, with a finality that startled even me. He plugged the USB into the projector. The screen at the far end of the room flickered on. And then my father's face appeared. My breath locked. He looked well, better than he had in years, wearing his navy suit, sitting in his home office, speaking straight to the camera. "Hello," he said quietly. "If you're watching this, it means I'm no longer here." Every chair went still. Even Brandon's smugness evaporated. I asked Harold to play this so there is no misunderstanding, no twisting of my intentions. His eyes were direct and unmoved. A stir passed through the room. "I want to start with my daughter, Lily, if you're here." His gaze seemed to find me through the screen. "I'm sorry." The word struck so sharply I forgot to breathe. "I'm sorry for the distance that grew between us. For believing things I never should have accepted. For letting others speak about you in my place instead of hearing you myself." My sight blurred. I didn't blink, but I recently learned the truth, he went on. 6 months ago, after a serious health scare, I began working from home. One afternoon, I went into Brandon's office to look for some files. There, I found a drawer full of letters addressed to me. Birthday cards, invitations to your shows, messages you'd sent over the years. Gasps rippled around the table. Brandon lurched from his seat. "That's not true," he sputtered. Harold's voice cut through sharply. "Sit down." Dad continued. "All of them hidden from me, all unopened. A shocked murmur rose louder. Uncle Leonard scowled. Brandon, what is this about? My father's expression darkened. That discovery made me question more. I hired a private investigator to examine communications, and what I learned shattered me. Calls from Lily intercepted. Voicemails erased. Messages sent back in my name without my consent. A tremor swept through me. Brandon's face drained of color. He's confused. His medication. Dad leaned closer to the camera. No, son. I knew precisely what I was doing. Silence sealed the room, and the investigation uncovered something far more serious. Dubious practices inside the company, inferior materials approved for major builds, falsified inspection documents, efforts to push permits through without proper oversight. Board members exchanged horrified glances. One whispered, "My God. I built this company on integrity," Dad said, "and what I found forced me to reevaluate everything." Brandon slammed his palm on the table. "This is absurd enough," Harold warned. Dad's voice softened again. "Lily, I regret every moment we lost. I was planning to visit you to see your world in New York to make things right. But if I didn't get the chance, I needed you to hear this from me. I am proud of you. Proud of your art, your bravery, the life you've created." My chest caved open. I covered my mouth as tears streamed unchecked. "Now," Dad continued, "as for my estate," the room froze. "My earlier will left most of my assets and full control of the company to Brandon, with a small trust for Lily." Brandon straightened, confidence returning. "That will has been rescinded." His confidence shattered instantly. "This new document reflects the truth of what I learned." Dad lifted a sheet of paper. "To my son, Brandon, I leave a monetary trust of $500,000, distributed annually and dependent upon his cooperation with a full ethics review of his behavior and completion of a business integrity program." Brandon sputtered. This is insane. This is falsified." Harold didn't flinch. "To my daughter, Lily, that I leave my home, my personal investments, and 51% ownership of the company. She may take on leadership or sell her shares as she sees fit." The room exploded. Board members muttered in panic. Aunt Marissa gasped. Uncle Leonard stared at Brandon with something close to revulsion. Dad's voice sliced through the uproar. "Lily, I know this is a weighty obligation, but you have the integrity this company requires. You see things honestly without cutting corners, and I trust you." My throat tightened. Finally, he said, leaning back. "I want to say 3 words I should have spoken far more often." Everything stilled. "I love you." Something inside me broke open and steadied at the same time. He ended with one last message. "Let truth lead you, and let this company be rebuilt with honor." The screen went dark for a long breath. No one shifted. Then Brandon exploded. "This isn't valid. She knows nothing about the business. She's an artist." Dad wasn't thinking clearly. "Harold, you let him." "Enough," a board member snapped. "You hid messages. You falsified documents. Do you have any idea how severe?" Brandon stumbled back, his face drained. "You're all turning on me." "No," I said at last, rising. My voice startled even me. Even calm, unmoved. "You did that on your own." He stared at me, stunned by the reversal. All morning he'd acted like the room belonged to him. Now every eye was on me. "You think you can do this?" He spat. "I don't have to," I said. Dad already did. His jaw locked. He looked around for someone to back him, but every face stayed cold. For the first time in my life, Brandon looked small. Harold closed the folder. "We'll move forward with the formal documents now." Brandon stormed out, slamming the door so hard the glass shivered. Nobody followed. The room held its breath until someone finally said, "Lily, congratulations." I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet, just steady. Like after years of detours, the narrative finally belonged to me again. In the days that followed, everything moved in pieces. Meetings, signatures, quiet conversations in hallways. But underneath the motion was a strange stillness, like the world had shifted slightly, and I was the only one aware of it. Harold guided me through the transition with a gentleness I hadn't expected. "Your father planned this carefully," he kept reminding me. "He wanted you to have certainty, not disorder." Certainty felt unfamiliar after so many years of confusion. Moving into Dad's house was harder than I imagined. The rooms felt both known and foreign. His coat still hung by the door. A mug waited in the sink as if he'd meant to wash it after one more cup. I stood in the quiet living room, letting the weight of it settle into me. Grief and relief twisted together in a way I couldn't untangle. In his study, I found a small envelope tucked in his desk drawer, my name written in his handwriting. Inside was a brief note, barely a paragraph, but enough to undo everything inside me. He wrote that he'd followed my shows from a distance, that he admired the way I saw the world, that he wished he'd told me earlier. I read it 3 times before I could breathe again. At the company, reactions varied. Some employees avoided my eyes, unsure how to approach the artist's daughter suddenly holding majority control. Others slipped into my new office quietly to say they were relieved real change was coming, the kind built on the principles my father founded everything on. As for Brandon, I heard he'd left Boston for a while. No forwarding address, no apology, and oddly, I didn't feel bitterness. Just a wide open space where something new could start. Standing on the back porch of my father's home, I watched the winter light fade over the yard where we used to build snowmen. For the first time in years, the quiet didn't feel crushing. It felt deserved. Dad's truth had finally cut through. Every lie, every distance Brandon created. And what remained was something clear. My life was mine again. The company, the house, the legacy. They were responsibilities, yes, but also a chance to rebuild with honesty at the core. If you've ever fought your way back to the truth, share your story below and subscribe for